All right, let's talk about managerial negotiations. I hope you don't have this image of a negotiation, but I know that many of my students do. They look at negotiation, and this is a humorous image, obviously, but they look at negotiation as a real conflict, a real confrontation. And for that reason, many of us do not like to negotiate. And this can harm us in our careers. And in our personal lives, like, for example, over the negotiation over a house. Now, why don't we like to negotiate? Some of us look at it as haggling. Do you remember Saturn? Saturn had a policy that their salespeople would not negotiate over selling a car. And it was the no haggle policy. Now, why did Saturn have this policy? Well, their researchers revealed, after many, many surveys, that the target audience, including millennials, young working adults, did not like to negotiate. And so Saturn really had a very successful policy, and they aren't the only ones. Other car companies are doing that too, where they say this is the best price. There's no need to haggle. There's no need to, to raise our blood pressure. This is the best price. And it appealed to people that like to avoid confrontations. Now, maybe one of the reasons you don't like to negotiate is you place a high value on courtesy. I do. I think courtesy is one of the hallmarks of civilization or civilized conduct. And we may think that there's no place in a negotiation for courtesy because we have to get down and dirty with somebody. Maybe negotiations make you feel uncomfortable because you're not an aggressive person. Or, and this is an important one, you don't want to jeopardize the relationship with the person across that table. If that person is your manager, for example, and you're negotiating over maybe a pay raise or a project or some kind of new assignment. Now, studies have shown that women in particular hate negotiating for this very reason. They value the relationship so much. And we'll be talking about that. We're going to devote an entire learning unit to that kind of negotiations. And that is negotiations where the relationship is very important. What are some of the stereotypes of effective negotiators? Well, they're pushy, they're argumentative, and we may see ourselves in a different light. We're not pushy. We don't like to argue, so we're not going to be very good negotiators. I remember when Donald Trump was campaigning, he promised the American people that he was going to renegotiate some bad deals, and he put it this way: I am going to find the top killer negotiators in the country to talk to North Korea, to talk to Russia, etc., etc. Well, that very term, killer negotiators, brings up an image that we may not be, we may not see ourselves as fitting. Maybe we don't have the win-lose mentality that we think an effective negotiator has to have. Maybe we don't want to beat somebody down to their bottom dollar. And we also look at, we associate effective negotiators with unpleasant experiences like buying a car. And we remember the closing techniques that the salesperson tried to manipulate us with. In this course, however, we're going to find that negotiations do not have to be unpleasant. You don't have to be out for blood. And by the way, getting the bottom dollar may not be in your best interest. I can tell you from 30 years in sales that people that beat their contractors down to the bottom dollars were not served well by those contractors who were not making any money on the job and could care less. Could care less. So it's often not in your best interest to do that. We're going to find that it's possible to be problem solvers together as partners, not as adversaries, not as opponents, seeking win-win solutions. Now, I want to make it clear on win-win. All the textbooks stress win-win, and I'm all for it. But nothing is wrong with self-interest. You cannot look at your own self-interest as being selfish. You have got to look out for yourself, because if you don't, who will? So we don't want to achieve win-win by subjugating our own interests. Imagine if you're negotiating with your manager, the tension is getting a little high in the room, and to alleviate that tension, you give in. Well, the manager is smiling, you're smiling, but you want your smile to be just a little bigger than the manager. Now, if you are a shy person and a nice person, you can be a great negotiator. You don't have to respond in kind to somebody who's trying to bully you. We're going to learn mental judo. I don't know if anybody here is familiar with judo. It's no longer as popular as it once was. But basically, what made judo so, and what makes it so effective is you use your opponent's strength or force against them. In other words, just picture this. If somebody is pushing you, you pull. You don't push back in judo. Conversely, if somebody is pulling you, you push. In other words, you're always using their energy against themselves. You can do that. You can be shy. You can be nice with very aggressive, powerful opponents. And their perception of you being weak can be a tremendous advantage if you use mental judo. So we'll learn that. Okay, where's my slide? Negotiation situations. Well, here's a lot of them. I don't want to spend a lot of time on this slide, but we know when we're negotiating. But I do want to point out that whenever we do negotiate, clarity is so incredibly important. Clarity. I don't believe the textbooks emphasize this enough. Communication skills are absolutely critical, because your opponent, or I should say your counterpart, must thoroughly understand your position, your suggestions for win-win solution. And that means that you have got to know your interests and issues to the bone. Or how else can you communicate them? This is really very, very important, because when we negotiate, we are communicating. We're trying to make our case and getting the other person to accept it. Now, good communicators listen more than they talk, not to take advantage of somebody, but to identify true needs and true interests so that we can solve their problem and find a win-win solution. And we'll see examples of this throughout the course. We are going to learn in this course that preparation is everything, that before you walk into a negotiation, you should have an agenda, you should have a negotiation checklist so that you can stay on track. We'll learn that you can rehearse before you even walk into the negotiating situation. You can get the words on your tongue. You can express your positions with clarity because you rehearsed them. And that we will probe for the reasons behind their position. If they have a position, I'm not going to say you can disregard their position, but you don't have to be bullied by it. There are reasons behind it. Picture an iceberg. The tip of the iceberg is their position. The bulk of the iceberg is underwater, and that's where we will probe to find the motivations behind their position. And when we do find objections from them, we will answer them honestly. One thing I want to have all of us do is to stop exaggerating the power of our counterpart and minimizing our own power. For example, let's examine the power of a job recruiter. Let's say the young lady on the right is looking for a job, and let's personalize this. She's a single mother. She has 2 kids. The rent is due. She's just about out of money. She's interviewed at other companies, and she's had job offers, but they haven't been companies that she really wanted to join. This is one she wants to join. She really wants to work here. And then on the left is the gatekeeper in HR. Now you may look at this image here. You hear somebody on the right with her purse on her lap in kind of the position of a supplicant, and somebody on the left who is kind of laying down the requirements. And you may think the person on the left has the power. Well, maybe not. Let's look at some of the motives and pressures of that recruiter on the left. Why is there a job opening? Well, it could be a new position, certainly, but it could be that the person she hired originally for that job, maybe 6 months ago, maybe a year or so ago, is no longer there. Maybe that person was fired. Maybe that person went to find a better job. Does the recruiter look good when her recruits fail or leave for a better job? Examine some of the costs of turnover. You've got to advertise for a new position. You've got to recruit. You've got to train somebody. Meanwhile, there's all kinds of business that is being lost. If you do some Googling, you'll find that the costs of turnover within a company are stratospheric. That recruiter may be under a lot of pressure to fill that slot from the department head who's crying out for a good candidate and maybe saying, get me somebody good this time. Does that recruiter look good when she hires a sharp employee who stays? Absolutely. If you're that sharp employee, you have more power than you think. So if there's one thing I hope you'll remember in this class, it is this. The person you are negotiating with is under pressure too, great pressure often. And that easing his or her anxieties is the secret to win-win. Okay, we'll move on to another PowerPoint momentarily, but I'm going to end this now.